It's very nice to be here with all of you. You know, the renewal of Tower of David is a great story. A lot wanted me to talk about other stuff. I will, but then I'm going to come back to the Tower of David because it's a little bit of an example. You might even say it can be a model for things that have to happen in other kinds of museums and other places in the world. Did we really have the steering committee for 10 years? Yes. We did? Because what I wanted to say at the beginning is that COVID was such a challenge everywhere, but the Tower of David Museum did a really amazing thing. Okay, someone had written the check, so the money was here, but to decide that you're just going to close down and renew your place and fill it, breathe new content into it, and get it all done in a couple of years' time is pretty remarkable. It didn't happen in all that many places anywhere in the world, and it did happen here. And when we were here in March for the official sort of dedication, it was a remarkable thing. And Eilat and her team, and I wish they were here so that I could say this in front of them, but they're all speaking at the same time somewhere else in the Tower of David. It was a remarkable experience. And you know, it's not just about you learning from others. The point in life is always to keep learning. You can mentor others, but you have to learn at the same time, because if you don't, you really get out of date. It passes you by. Now, Eilat did want me to talk about museums and what the relevance of museums is today. It's a politically complex time in the world. It's also a time when we've shifted to a virtual reality, which is different from what the analog world of museums was about, which means that there's a lot that you have to get your arms around and deal with. My museum history is quite long, my entire career. Actually, I was going to say till recently, but still, is about the museum world. It's about the museum, the material culture world. And when I was young in school and I thought, what will I do when I grow up? I was going to be an academic. And then one day I realized that academia really is a bubble. It was and it still is today. And I just had an epiphany one day, which was that the museum world allowed you to be in academia and focus on content, but also deal with the reality of life in the world and what people in the world need to learn from by looking at the history of material culture. My own background was in modernism. It was like what happened in 1850 that changed the visual cultural vocabulary that allowed for the invention of modernism. And I didn't go to a bad university, but somehow they never said to me, you know, you also have to think about what happened before 1850, but I never did. And I did get to go to, I was blessed, I was lucky. I went from school to the Museum of Modern Art. This was the fountainhead for the knowledge of the narrative of modernism, which was my field and continued to be, and in a way still continues to be. And I was there for a really long time, and some of you might know that out of the blue I was asked to come to Jerusalem. I'd never been here. I thought it would be intriguing to come and see what this Israel Museum was about. The only thing I knew about it was that they collected contemporary art in a really interesting way. And I thought, well, that's sort of curious, a museum in Israel and the Middle East with a focus on contemporary art. I did come here. I did ascend the promenade to enter the museum. Halfway up that promenade, I realized that I was going to have to come here because the power of that place, and this does also relate to this one, where it is, the site, the setting, the architecture of it, was pretty remarkable. It was breathtaking. And even, you know, MoMA's like sits in an urban grid in the city, but also there is this breathtaking dimension there, but it's urban. And here, this museum of the Israel Museum sits on the crest of a hill, and it's stunning. And it sits within 20 acres. It sits within an international modernist envelope, which is the backdrop for something. And I went inside, and I suddenly thought, for the first time, there's 1.5 million years of the story of material cultural history that precedes 1850. And so, of course, we came here. And it did change my life to come here. People do say that. And actually, Henry, you're here for the first time. Is it changing your life? You see? Ask Henry.
He's being transformed before my very eyes.
What happened to me coming here, and when we did the renewal of the museum in 2010, and Chaim Gittler was a part of that story as well, we shaped a mantra that all things are connected across time and around the globe. And that is something that was meaningful in 2010. And really, I'm going to stop and tell a few stories first. But what matters today and relates to the role and responsibility of museums today is that this notion that all things connect across time and around the globe could not be more important. When I got here and we did our rethinking of what the potential of the collections of the Israel Museum was, I realized that this narrative had a huge importance, and that it was about cultural diplomacy. It was about the way that wherever you are in the world, you need to connect to everywhere else in the world. And if you look back through the history of time, from the beginning of time to the present, this connectedness has a meaning which is about bringing us together, not taking us apart. So I was at MoMA for all those years, and you know, if you've been there on 53rd Street, at the end of the block is the Hilton Hotel, and presidents would always go by with their, you know, with all those cars in front and behind them, and they would rush to the Hilton, and no one ever stopped at MoMA. I was there for 22 years. No president of the United States ever came to MoMA. I got here, Bill Clinton came, George Bush came, Barack Obama came, and Donald Trump came. Donald Trump wasn't as much fun as the others, but all four presidents in the US during my tenure here came to the Israel Museum. And I realized that we're about a kind of diplomacy. And you know, not all countries in the world, even throughout my time, liked or loved Israel. And there are ambassadors of many countries that serve here that don't really like Israel. But those guys all came to the Israel Museum. It was amazing, because we were a way into a different story for them. Now, I have a little story which I will show you. You might all remember when Barack Obama actually came in 2013 during his second term as president. He hadn't come in the first term. There was a lot of conversation about that. There was a lot of sort of vocabulary that for some here he was the devil. And he came and he was here for 36 hours. Chaim remembers this. And he told us at the beginning, not us, he told whoever who told us, that he wanted to spend 2 hours of his time at the Israel Museum. He didn't want his delegation to go to the Shrine of the Book. He wanted to do it alone, and everyone else could watch it on closed-circuit TV. And so he did come. Here he is walking next to then and now Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And we walked through the museum. Now, when I use this image, and I explain to people that in Israel you stand exactly next to everybody around you. There's no physical distance. Physical distance has a meaning. If you want to feel engaged, you are near each other. And look at this curious image where there is like this big space between Barack Obama and Bibi Netanyahu. We did spend 2 hours there. It was hugely, I had never had a day like this in my life. Here was a president who didn't just have the attention span of a mosquito. He wanted to spend 2 hours understanding the meaning of the Dead Sea Scrolls and how they related to the narrative of Judaism to Christianity to Islam. And when we left, I didn't know him before this moment. This is a picture that's not allowed to be shown publicly because the president isn't allowed to hug somebody in an official way. And that guy hugged me. I will always remember that moment. So see how happy he is? 2 minutes later, our chairman and I were standing talking to each other, and we noticed that those two guys were having a shouting match about 2 minutes away from us. Look at Prime Minister Netanyahu's face. He is not grinning. He's not beaming. It was a different discussion. So this is like an illustration. It's like cultural diplomacy and political lack of diplomacy, side by side. And that night, and this is also a great thing, do you know Jon Stewart in The Daily Show? We opened Jon Stewart's Daily Show. The segment that night was called Barak Ata Adonai. All over the world, people saw this. And you know, this is cultural diplomacy. Here is the President of the United States spending 2 hours out of 36 hours experiencing something at the museum, and that night, you recall, he wasn't invited to speak at the Knesset. He spoke at Binyanei HaOma to an open audience of a few thousand, and he started talking about his experience in the Israel Museum seeing the Dead Sea Scrolls. This is cultural diplomacy. Now, I'll just show you one more image, and Chaim remembers this. In the Israel Museum, you all know, because I hope, trust, your kids went there as young kids and took art classes in elementary school where Jewish, Muslim, and Christian kids were together. Even before they could speak one another's languages, they were creating art together. And we would have a graduation moment. And you know how to parse this image. Look who's in this image. Orthodox Jews, their children. Arab Christian kids, Arab Muslim kids, their parents. Look at this moment, and these kids are all together, and they're not staying away from each other. They just wanted to do a selfie, and they were all whispering to me that there was no place here more beautiful than that place. So this is what cultural diplomacy can be about. Now, should I leave this image here or go to the black screen again? So, you know, the experience of doing this and of being here really, for me, turned on the light about what culture can mean. And if you fast forward to where we are today and what are museums supposed to do or what can they do, we're living in this time where terms like diversity and inclusiveness have become politicized and polarized. And you know, I started to think about the fact that if you look from a cultural perspective, and whether you're a universal museum, which is an encyclopedic museum with the mantra of all things connecting, like the Israel Museum, or a subject-specific one, like the Tower of David, which is just about Jerusalem. The point is that if you think about the connection between what your material is about and what happened and continues to happen in the world around you, in the time in which you live, or in any time in history, and any place in the globe, that is about the mosaic of diversity, of global diversity, and it is about the message of inclusiveness, the message of reaching out. And you know, if you're a Jewish museum or a Black History museum, and if you take as part of your responsibility really reaching out and understanding the time and place in which the culture that you are presenting and interpreting was created, that is the message of diversity and inclusion. And it's not political. And if you move it away from politics, it opens a door to opportunity that you don't have otherwise. And you know, if you think about cultural history, during many times over time, you have these dramatic shifts. Just don't think too far back, but in the last century plus, World War I created a kind of social upheaval in Europe. What came out of it? Dada and Surrealism. You know, there was chaos and confusion, and what came out of it but a new kind of creative making that gave you an opportunity to think about how you can express creatively the things that are happening around you. And this is something that we need to fast forward to for today. So I want to shift for a moment to my new life at the Jerusalem Foundation. And some of you know well what we do. We have a particular focus, and the Tower of David and Eilat are beneficiaries of this focus, on giving Innovation Fund grants to nonprofit organizations across the mosaic of the city, every community and population here, so that we can give them the opportunity to realize an aspirational goal, to be creative, to demonstrate innovative success, and also to demonstrate a kind of leadership for a bright view for the future here. I just want to show you a couple examples of what we do, and they're short clips, and the reason that I want to show them to you, you know, if I'm outside of Israel and I show these things, I say to people, you don't realize that this kind of activity is taking place in Jerusalem. They don't think of Jerusalem in the way, the other one first, the way that you are going to see this. These are Israeli and Palestinian dance students at the Jerusalem Academy of Music and Dance, who during COVID couldn't do their year-end program indoors, so they did it in the big multi-story parking garage of the Yes Planet on Derech Hebron. Here, how do you start it? Now you know, here, just watch this. The choreography is by Israeli and Palestinian choreographers. The dancers are Israeli and Palestinian dancers. Now, you all live here, and I hope you have experienced this kind of activity in Jerusalem. Outside of Israel, no one can imagine that this kind of production takes place here. They see Jerusalem as a dark place, a place that is full of the intensity of conflict, whether it's political or religious, and to see something like this is something that they don't know. The second one that I want to show, do you all know about Sinsilla, the women's beekeeping cooperative in Sheikh Jarrah, which teaches Palestinian women to tend bees, make honey, then the cooperative packages honey and distributes it, and the proceeds go to all these women, and they are self-supporting because of this initiative. And it's in Sheikh Jarrah. When you say Sheikh Jarrah out in the world, people think of conflict. They think of bonfires, rock throwing, people shouting, kill the Arabs, kill the Jews. This is Sinsilla, which I'm proud to say we support, but which is also part of the vitality of East Jerusalem.
Here in Sinsilla, the whole idea is about how to make social innovation.
I only have two.
My name is I'm the co-founder and the director of Sinsilla. Sinsilla is a project that started in 2019 about finding green roots in Jerusalem. So we found out that we need to work with the community, and especially women with unemployment rate over 80%. We were doing urban farming courses, we were holding groups for workshops. We established the first woman bee cooperative in the world, produce honey, and money goes back to them after we sell it, and as an indirect, they will do a green room in their houses. Now we have a center of sustainability, empowerment, and environment. One of the main objectives of this project is to heal the urban environment in Jerusalem, so adding another layer to the city. I'm so excited about this project. When I see the changes on the ground, it gives me a lot of hope. I would like to thank the Jerusalem Foundation, the one who's doing a lot of changes in the city. I would love really to thank the Innovation Fund because they give us the chance to start something like this. I hope that the Jerusalem Foundation will continue supporting, helping organizations really doing things on the ground.
So, what is our message here? And this is going to bring me back to the last things that I want to say, which are about what has been accomplished here. In a moment. There. Maybe there's no such thing as political diplomacy. I'm just not sure. But there is certainly cultural diplomacy. And political activism exists in many places, but often you're banging your head against a locked door. Cultural activism, social activism and cultural activism, like these two examples that you've just seen, are a way to open a door and move forward without the frustration of that locked door. This brings me back to our Tower of David here. And you know, when I spoke about this notion of a universal museum or a subject-specific one, what can be more subject-specific than a place that is devoted to the history of Jerusalem? That is what this place is about. And, you know, think of this notion: site, setting, architecture, being a backdrop for telling a story. And this is what you have here. And it's both the reality of it and the symbol of it. And exactly what was here for a really long time was exactly what I've described: site, the power of site, setting, landscape, architecture, and the making of a backdrop. But what's happened here now is that over these 2 years of the subtle restoration of the stones that are the backdrop for this story, and the way that that was done with delicacy, and the way that it's now presented and illuminated, lighted inside and out, is pretty remarkable. Because looking at nothing, the power of that as the backdrop for a 3,000-year history of Jerusalem is pretty impressive. And you know, I don't know if you all went to the Gallery 1 and you walk in. There was this idea that there had to be a 3-minute documentary, a film, that would tell you the history of Jerusalem over 3,000 years. And we said, look, there's no film footage. There are no photographs. It doesn't exist. And we brought Ari Folman here to do the animation, which, if you haven't seen, you must go and look at it, because it's truly stunning. It's like creative making today that tells you 3,000 years of story in a vocabulary that people today can understand. And what has been accomplished here, and as a museum person, I have to say this, you don't find it in many museums, is a way that objects and, you know, interactive multimedia can be brought together without one overpowering the other, so that you have a sense of being delivered the message of the place, but not being overwhelmed by it, either on too high a level or too low a level. And what happens here is that you come to this Tower of David Museum, you experience this story with real objects and with multimedia, and you look out the windows and you see a real city. This place is both a place to deliver that narrative and a place to be a gateway to the city itself. And it is a kind of model, and we're already seeing it in the response and in the media's response to what's happened here. But Eilat, you and your team can and should be very proud that you are creating a model in a place that the world knows only as full of strife and tension, that tells a story in an amazingly cultural way. So this is just to congratulate you and thank you all for listening to me.